They called him mad. They called him a failure. But the truth is, Vincent van Gogh was a man who felt the world too deeply to survive it. He saw colors no one else could see, felt emotions too powerful to contain, and painted not for fame, but for his sanity. His story isn't just about art. It's about pain, loneliness, obsession, and the burning need to be understood. Before he became the legend whose paintings now sell for millions, he was just a broken soul searching for light in a world that only offered darkness. Vincent van Gogh was born on March 30, 1853, in the small Dutch village of Zundert. The world he entered was grey, quiet, and simple, but in his heart, it was already full of color and noise. He was the eldest surviving child in a deeply religious family. His father, Theodorus, was a Protestant pastor, and his mother, Anna, loved nature and art. But before Vincent's birth, there had been another baby, also named Vincent, who died at birth exactly 1 year earlier. Every year on his birthday, Vincent would pass the gravestone that bore his own name. Imagine being a child growing up with your name carved in stone before you even understood what life meant. It haunted him. It shaped him. It made him question why he was alive when another version of him wasn't. From a young age, Vincent was quiet but intense. He noticed everything: the way the light hit the wheat fields, the sadness in people's eyes, the loneliness that hung in the air after church. He was different from other children. While they played, he would wander the countryside, sketching trees or watching clouds. He never really fit in. His classmates thought he was strange, even a little odd. His teachers said he had a sharp mind but a troubled spirit. He was emotional, stubborn, and often misunderstood. But those emotions would one day explode into something extraordinary. At 16, Vincent left school and began working for an art dealership called Goupil & C in The Hague. His uncle helped him get the job, hoping it would give him direction. At first, he did well. He traveled to London and Paris, surrounded by art and culture. But while others saw business, Vincent saw emotion. He didn't just sell paintings, he felt them. He wanted to understand the souls of the artists who created them. In London, something unexpected happened. He fell in love. Her name was Eugenie Lawyer, the daughter of his landlady. She was kind, gentle, and everything Vincent longed for. He loved her deeply, but when he confessed his feelings, she rejected him. That heartbreak shattered him more than anyone realized. After the rejection, Vincent's personality began to change. He became distant, obsessed with religion, and withdrawn from the world. He stopped caring about his appearance, his job, and even his future. The once promising young man started slipping into darkness. He wrote long letters to his younger brother Theo, the one person who never gave up on him. Their bond became the only thing keeping him afloat. Theo loved him deeply and supported him both emotionally and financially for the rest of his life. Vincent's spiritual obsession grew. He decided to become a preacher, hoping to dedicate his life to serving others. His family supported him at first, believing it might heal his restless soul. But even in faith, Vincent's passion became too intense. He studied theology for a while but failed to follow the rules. He couldn't memorize Bible verses the way others did. He wanted to feel God, not just read about him. He was sent to preach in a poor mining region called Borinage in Belgium. The miners lived in misery, and Vincent saw their suffering as his own. He gave away his food, his clothes, even his bed. He lived like the poorest of them, covered in soot and sleeping on the floor. The church leaders thought he had gone too far, that his behavior was unfit for a preacher. They dismissed him, saying he was too emotional and too extreme. That rejection destroyed him again. Every time Vincent tried to give his life meaning, the world pushed him back. He felt useless, lost, and unwanted. But out of that pain came something new. During his time in Borinage, he began sketching the miners and their families. Their faces were tired, dirty, and real. He saw beauty in their suffering. It was the first time he realized that art could express what words never could. Theo encouraged him to keep drawing. "If you cannot preach through words," Theo wrote, "maybe you can preach through paint." Those words lit a spark. Vincent decided to become an artist. Not for fame. Not for money. But to speak a language only he could understand. He was 27 years old, a late start for someone who would change the world. But life didn't get easier. His early drawings were dark, heavy, and filled with emotion. He painted peasants with rough hands and tired eyes, showing their dignity and pain. His first masterpiece, The Potato Eaters, came from that world, brown, earthy, and raw. Critics hated it. They said it was ugly, crude, and lifeless. But Vincent didn't care. He painted the truth. And the truth wasn't pretty. Behind every brushstroke was loneliness. He lived in poverty, often starving to buy paints. He smoked constantly, barely slept, and worked with manic energy. But inside, his mind was breaking. Vincent's relationship with his family worsened. His father disapproved of his lifestyle and thought he was insane. They argued constantly, and Vincent often ran away in shame. Theo remained his only anchor. Through letters, he poured his heart out, his doubts, his fears, his small moments of hope. In one letter he wrote, "I feel a failure, that's it. I feel that this is the destiny that will never change." But even as he wrote those words, he kept painting. Because deep down, painting was his only reason to live. Every brushstroke was a cry for understanding. Every color was a piece of his soul. Vincent didn't know it yet, but his madness and his genius were the same thing. He was creating a new language, one the world wasn't ready to hear. And as his mind began to crumble, his art began to bloom. The boy who once felt invisible was now painting his own heart on canvas, one trembling line at a time. When Vincent van Gogh decided to dedicate his life to art, it wasn't an easy choice. He was almost 30, broke, and mentally fragile. Society saw him as a failure. Even his own family doubted him, except for his brother Theo. But deep inside, Vincent had made peace with one truth. He would rather live a short, honest life in color than a long, empty one in gray. He began studying art seriously in Belgium and later in the Netherlands. His early works were dark, painted in shades of brown, black, and gray. He believed art should show the truth of life, not its illusions. The farmers, the workers, the poor, they became his world. He wanted to show their pain and dignity in every brushstroke. In 1885, he painted The Potato Eaters. 5 peasants sitting around a dimly lit table, eating their humble meal with rough, tired hands. Critics laughed at it, saying it was clumsy and depressing. But Vincent saw it differently. To him, those hands were sacred, those faces were honest, and that moment was real life. He wasn't painting for beauty. He was painting for truth. Yet even as he worked harder, loneliness grew inside him like a storm. He longed for love, for someone who could see the world as he did. But love never came easily. His emotions were too strong, his moods too unstable. He met a woman named Clasina Hornick, a former prostitute who was poor, sick, and struggling to raise her child. Most men would have ignored her, but Vincent saw her pain. He took her in, cared for her, and used her as a model. He hoped love could heal them both. But society didn't understand. His family was horrified. They said she was ruining his life and reputation. Under pressure and guilt, Vincent eventually left her. That decision haunted him. He once wrote to Theo, "I wanted to make her happy, but I couldn't even save myself." That was Vincent, a man who carried the weight of others' pain but could never escape his own. After leaving Scene, he moved constantly, searching for peace. He studied with other painters, tried new techniques, and experimented with color. Slowly, his art began to change. The dark tones faded, replaced by light, movement, and feeling. He was learning how to let his emotions speak through color. In 1886, he moved to Paris to live with Theo. Paris was the center of the art world, bright, alive, and full of new ideas. There he met artists like Claude Monet, Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec, and Paul Gauguin. They were part of the Impressionist movement, breaking all the rules of traditional art. For the first time, Vincent saw art that felt alive. Bold colors, loose brushstrokes, and light that seemed to dance. He was fascinated. He began experimenting, yellow for warmth, blue for sadness, red for passion. He finally found a language that matched his emotions. But even in Paris, happiness didn't last. The noise, the crowds, the endless struggle for recognition, it exhausted him. His mind was never still. Some days he worked endlessly, painting dozens of canvases. Other days he couldn't get out of bed. He drank too much coffee, smoked constantly, and barely ate. He and Theo loved each other deeply, but their relationship grew tense. Theo worried about Vincent's health. Vincent felt guilty for depending on him. He wanted to be successful, to pay Theo back, but the world still ignored him. He sold almost nothing. Critics called his art crazy and unfinished. People laughed at the man with paint-stained clothes and wild eyes. But Vincent didn't stop. He believed that art was not meant to please everyone. It was meant to tell the truth of the soul. In 1888, desperate for peace, Vincent left Paris and moved to the small town of Arles in southern France. There, the light was golden, the fields endless, and the sky deep blue. It was the place he had been searching for. He called it the South of Color. In Arles, his creativity exploded. He painted sunflowers, wheat fields, and starry skies. The colors were brighter than ever, yellow like sunlight, blue like dreams. His brush moved with emotion, sometimes fast, sometimes trembling. He painted with his heart, not his hands. But isolation began to take over. The villagers thought he was strange. They whispered about his behavior, how he painted in the fields all day, how he talked to himself, how he barely slept. They didn't understand that he wasn't mad. He was consumed by creation. Vincent wrote to Theo, "I am in a fury of work. I paint as if I am trying to catch life before it fades." That fury brought beauty, but also exhaustion. He would work for hours under the burning sun, then stay awake all night staring at the stars. He painted like a man running out of time. Loneliness returned stronger than ever. He dreamed of creating a community of artists, a place where painters could live and work together, inspiring each other. He invited Paul Gauguin to join him in Arles. Gauguin agreed. For a short time, the two artists lived together in what Vincent called the Yellow House. At first, it was perfect, two geniuses sharing ideas, pushing each other to new heights. They talked about art for hours, painted side by side, and created masterpieces. But soon tension grew. Vincent's mental health was fragile. He was emotional, impulsive, and easily hurt. Gauguin was more controlled, sometimes cold. Their personalities clashed. One night in December 1888, after a terrible argument, something inside Vincent broke. No one knows exactly what happened, but he ended up cutting off part of his own ear. Bleeding and confused, he wrapped it in cloth and delivered it to a woman at a nearby brothel. The incident shocked the town. People began calling him the Mad Painter. He was taken to the hospital, trembling and weak. Gauguin left Arles soon after, ending their friendship. For Vincent, it was the darkest moment of his life. He wrote to Theo, "My sadness is endless." Yet even from that darkness, he created beauty. While recovering, he painted self-portrait with bandaged ear, his face pale, his eyes tired, but his gaze strong. It was not a painting of weakness. It was a painting of survival. Despite everything, he returned to work. His art became even more emotional, almost spiritual. He painted the night cafe, the bedroom in Arles, and irises. He used color to express feelings no words could capture. But his mind was unraveling. He suffered from hallucinations, anxiety, and terrifying breakdowns. Sometimes he forgot what he had done. Sometimes he believed he was cursed. The villagers grew afraid of him and demanded he be sent away. In May 1889, he admitted himself to the asylum of Saint-Rémy de Provence. It was a desperate act, a man trying to save what was left of his sanity. Inside those walls, surrounded by silence and suffering, Vincent painted like never before. He turned his pain into color, his madness into movement. From the window of his room, he looked at the night sky and painted one of the greatest masterpieces of all time, The Starry Night. He once said, "When I have a terrible need of religion, then I go out and paint the stars. In the starry night, the sky swirls with life. The stars burn with fire. The moon glows like hope in the darkness." It was not just a painting, it was his soul on canvas. Even in confinement, he worked constantly. He painted the hospital gardens, the olive trees, the mountains, and the people around him. His art became a mirror of his fragile mind, full of chaos, beauty, and sadness. Theo continued to support him, but both brothers were struggling. Theo's own health was failing, and his job was becoming stressful. Still, he wrote to Vincent, reminding him that his art mattered. But Vincent could feel his end coming. He wrote, "I feel a failure. But the pictures will speak for me." His mind was tired, his heart heavy, but his hands never stopped moving. He painted more than ever before, as if he knew time was running out. His work was finally beginning to get attention. A few critics started to see his genius. But for Vincent, fame meant nothing. He wanted peace, not praise. He was still haunted by guilt, for Theo's sacrifices, for his failures, for the people he had loved and lost. His thoughts became darker, his hope weaker. Yet even in that storm, he created light. He painted Wheatfield with cypresses, the olive trees, irises, and Wheatfield with crows. Each one was a message that beauty can exist even in suffering. The man who painted pain had turned it into eternal life. When Vincent van Gogh entered the asylum at Saint-Rémy-de-Provence in May 1889, he was not the world-famous artist we know today. He was a broken man, fragile, misunderstood, and lost in his own mind. The world saw only madness. But inside that madness lived something sacred, something that words could never describe, a vision of beauty that pain could not destroy. The asylum stood on the edge of quiet hills surrounded by olive trees and lavender fields. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful for someone whose mind never stopped moving. The doctors allowed him a small room, with a single window that looked out over the countryside. That window would become his escape, the only link between his suffering and the world outside. At first, Vincent was terrified. The other patients screamed at night, haunted by their own demons. The walls echoed with sorrow. He could hear footsteps pacing, cries from the distance, the sound of despair that never slept. Yet Vincent, in that place of darkness, found a strange sense of calm. For once, no one expected anything from him. He could just paint. He wasn't allowed to leave the asylum grounds at first, so he painted what he saw: the gardens, the trees, the flowers, and the other patients. His colors changed. They were no longer the joyful yellows of Alls. They became deeper, more spiritual. Every brushstroke was like a prayer. Vincent's connection to nature grew stronger. He once wrote to Theo, "When I look at the cypresses, I see the flame of life." He believed nature had a soul, and that through painting, he could understand it. He would spend hours staring at the sky, the fields, the mountains, trying to find meaning in their silence. His days were repetitive but filled with purpose. He woke early, painted until exhaustion, then read or wrote letters to Theo. The asylum became his sanctuary and his prison. Sometimes he would collapse into despair, unable to move, hearing voices that tormented him. But whenever he regained his strength, he returned to his easel. Painting was his medicine. It was during one of these long nights that he created the Starry Night. From his small window, Vincent saw the hills and the cypress trees under the moonlight. But what he painted was not what he saw, it was what he felt. The sky was alive, swirling and trembling with movement. The stars weren't dots of light, they were bursts of fire. The moon glowed like a soul burning in the distance. Below, the small village lay asleep, silent and still, untouched by the storm of emotion above it. The cypress trees rose like flames, reaching toward the sky as if they wanted to touch the stars. It was both beautiful and painful, a vision of hope and chaos blended together. Vincent didn't know that the Starry Night would one day become one of the most famous paintings in history. To him, it was simply an expression of what lived inside him: the madness, the wonder, the sorrow, and the need for peace. He once wrote, "Why, I ask myself, shouldn't the shining dots of the sky be as accessible as the black dots on the map of France?" He saw the universe not as distant but as intimate, something human, something that spoke to his pain. Despite his emotional struggles, the asylum period became one of the most productive times of his life. In just over a year, he painted more than 150 works. The olive trees, the irises, the wheat fields, the mountains, everything became alive in his hands. He used thick paint, heavy strokes, and swirling lines that mirrored his inner turbulence. But with creation came collapse. There were days when he couldn't paint at all, when the darkness inside him consumed every ounce of strength. He experienced violent fits, hallucinations, and deep depression. He feared he was losing himself completely. During these times, Theo's letters were his lifeline. Theo kept encouraging him, sending supplies, money, and words of love. Their bond was more than brotherly, it was spiritual. Vincent once told Theo, "You are the only one who believes in me, and that keeps me alive." But Theo, too, was struggling. He was overworked, sick, and newly married. He wanted to protect his brother, but he also had his own family to care for. Vincent felt guilty for being a burden. He loved Theo deeply, but that love often came with pain. He worried he was ruining his brother's life. Still, he kept painting. Even when his mind betrayed him, his art remained honest. He painted the olive trees, saying that the twisted trunks reminded him of human souls. He painted the garden of the asylum, filled with blue irises and soft green light. Each piece carried a silent message. "I am still here." Art was his way of speaking when his voice failed him. In one letter he wrote, "I put my heart and soul into my work, and I have lost my mind in the process." That was not a metaphor. It was the truth. His paintings became his sanity, and his madness all at once. He began studying Japanese prints, fascinated by their simplicity and harmony. The calm balance of Japanese art soothed him. He wanted to find that same peace, the quiet that lived between colors. But peace was never permanent for Vincent. The asylum staff admired his discipline but worried about his instability. There were moments when he was found unconscious, having suffered violent attacks. He couldn't remember them afterward. He would wake up, confused, and return to painting as if nothing had happened. The other patients sometimes watched him work in silence. They called him the quiet one with the brushes. He didn't talk much, but his presence was powerful. When he painted, everything around him disappeared. His hands moved fast, his eyes filled with light. For a few hours he was free. In late 1889, some of his paintings were shown at an exhibition in Paris. For the first time, he received a small glimpse of recognition. Critics noticed the emotion, the honesty, the courage in his work. One called his art the work of a genius touched by fire. Theo was proud but worried. He knew how fragile Vincent was, and fame could not fix the cracks inside him. Vincent appreciated the attention but didn't care for it. He wrote, "I am not an artist for praise. I paint because I must." By early 1890, his condition began to improve slightly. The doctors allowed him to leave the asylum on short trips. He visited the nearby village, painted wheat fields, and walked among olive trees, He felt a bit of hope returning. But the episodes still came without warning. He feared them, knowing they could strike at any moment. The fear itself was exhausting. He began to believe that his illness would never let him live freely again. He wrote to Theo, "I can see clearly that my art has a future, but I have none." Those words revealed the tragic truth. Vincent knew he was creating something immortal, but he felt he would not live to see it appreciated. His last months in Saint Remy were both beautiful and heartbreaking. He painted wheatfield with cypresses, tall trees dancing against a sky filled with motion. He painted irises, full of delicate blues and greens, bursting with life. He even painted his own room, showing its simplicity and loneliness. Each painting was a piece of his heart, a conversation between pain and beauty. By May 1890, his doctor suggested he move to a quieter place, away from the asylum. Vincent agreed, hoping a new environment might help him recover. He left Saint Remy and traveled to the village of Auvers-sur-Oise, near Paris, to be closer to Theo. He carried with him his paints, his brushes, and his fragile hope. He believed he could start again, that maybe this time life would be kind. As he looked one last time at the asylum, he whispered to himself words no one heard, a promise to keep painting, even if it killed him. He didn't know it yet, but his final masterpiece, his final heartbreak, was waiting for him there in Auvers. The man who had painted the stars was about to face his last and deepest darkness. When Vincent Van Gogh arrived in Auvers-sur-Oise in May 1890, the air was warm, the fields golden, and the river calm. It was a quiet village near Paris, surrounded by endless countryside. After a year of struggle in the asylum, this new place felt like a breath of peace. He hoped the silence and open skies would finally give him rest. Theo had arranged everything. He found a local doctor named Dr. Paul Gachet to look after Vincent. Gachet wasn't just a doctor. He was also an amateur painter and a friend to artists. Theo believed he would understand Vincent better than most. Vincent agreed, writing to Theo that Dr. Gachet was rather eccentric, but truly kind. At first, everything seemed brighter. Vincent rented a small room at the Revue Inn, a narrow attic space with a slanted ceiling and one window that looked out onto the rooftops. It was simple, but it was enough. He painted the room, calling it a peaceful corner for a poor painter. Auvers inspired him instantly. The rolling wheat fields, the tall cypress trees, the crooked cottages. They were everything his soul longed for. Every day he walked through the countryside with his canvas and paints, working under the burning sun. He painted with furious energy, sometimes finishing 1 or 2 canvases in a single day. The villagers watched him curiously as he stood among the fields, his coat blowing in the wind, his brush moving fast, his eyes burning with focus. He painted the church of Auvers, its blue shadows and sharp lines rising like a dream. He painted Dr. Gachet's portrait, filled with sadness and thought. He painted cottages, gardens, and the wheat fields that surrounded him, always the wheat fields. To Vincent, those fields were alive. He saw life, death, and renewal in every stalk of grain. They reminded him of people, fragile, golden, waiting to be harvested by time. Despite his energy, he felt something heavy inside him. He was painting like a man possessed, but he wasn't at peace. He once wrote to Theo, "I have days of calm, and then days when I feel I am in a storm again." His illness hadn't disappeared. It hid beneath the surface, waiting. The calm of Auvers couldn't silence the voices in his mind or the pain in his heart. Dr. Gachet tried to help him. They talked about art, health, and the loneliness that haunted creative souls. Gachet admired Vincent deeply and posed for one of his most famous portraits. Resting his head on his hand, his expression filled with melancholy. Vincent told Theo, "I have found in him a true friend, and yet a friend who is as ill and full of nerves as I am." Even in friendship, he saw reflection, two broken men, both fighting the same invisible enemy. Theo visited when he could, but he was sick and exhausted. He had married and had a newborn baby named Vincent, after his brother. The birth filled Vincent with pride and love, but also sadness. He wanted to be part of his nephew's life, yet he felt he was drifting further away from everyone. Money was still tight. Vincent depended entirely on Theo, who now had more responsibilities than ever. Though Theo never complained, Vincent's guilt grew unbearable. He believed he was a burden, an endless weight on the brother who had sacrificed everything for him. In his letters, his words began to change. The hope that once flickered in his tone was fading. He wrote, "My dear Theo, I feel like a failure. My life means nothing, and I fear it always will." Still, he painted. Maybe because it was the only way he knew to stay alive. In those final months, his style reached its peak. His brushstrokes were wild and rhythmic, almost musical. His colors were fierce, yellow for life, blue for sadness, green for renewal. He painted the fields under stormy skies, the trees bending in the wind, and the birds flying in dark clouds. It was as if his soul was pouring out of him faster than his body could contain it. The villagers often saw him wandering alone with his easel and straw hat. Some said he looked peaceful. Others said he looked like a man walking towards something inevitable. He was kind to people, quiet, polite. But inside, he was drowning. He wrote to Theo, "I feel a kind of sadness that will never go away." Even Dr. Gachet, who cared deeply for him, began to worry. He noticed how Vincent's moods changed quickly, one moment full of light, the next lost in despair. Gachet encouraged him to rest, but Vincent couldn't stop painting. He feared that if he stopped, the darkness would swallow him completely. One afternoon, he painted one of his most haunting works, Wheatfield with Crows. The canvas shows a field split by a dark path, the sky heavy with storm clouds, and crows flying above. The colors are violent, yellow and black clashing like thunder and light. Many believe it was his goodbye. Looking at it, you can almost feel his emotions, the loneliness, the confusion, the quiet acceptance of fate. The road leads nowhere, the crows scatter like restless souls. It is a painting of life ending. Days after finishing it, something inside him gave way. On July 27, 1890, Vincent walked into the fields he loved so much, carrying his easel and painting tools. What exactly happened next remains uncertain. Some believe he shot himself in the chest with a small pistol he carried for protection. Others argue it may have been an accident, or even an act of cruelty by local boys. The truth will never be known. What is known is that he managed to walk back to the inn, bleeding, pale, and trembling. He climbed the narrow stairs to his small room and lay on his bed. When the innkeeper asked what happened, Vincent reportedly whispered, I tried to kill myself. The doctor and villagers rushed to help him, but the wound was too deep. There was nothing they could do. Theo came as fast as he could. When he entered the room, Vincent was weak but calm. They talked quietly, their bond stronger than ever. Theo held his brother's hand as Vincent said, "The sadness will last forever." He died in Theo's arms 2 days later, on July 29, 1890. He was 37 years old. The villagers buried him in the small cemetery of Auvers, surrounded by the golden fields he had painted again and again. His coffin was covered with yellow flowers, his favorite color, the color of sunlight and hope. Theo was heartbroken. He wrote to their mother. He was so calm, so gentle, as if he had found peace at last. But peace for Theo did not last long. He fell ill shortly after Vincent's death, his health broken by grief and exhaustion. Within 6 months, Theo also died. He was buried near Vincent, so the two brothers who had shared a lifetime of love, pain, and letters could rest side by side. For years, Vincent's paintings were forgotten. People still called him the mad painter, not understanding what he had created. But slowly, the world began to see what he saw, that beauty is born from suffering, and that love can live through art. Theo's widow, Johanna van Gogh, played a huge role in this. She collected Vincent's letters, preserved his paintings, and made sure the world finally saw his genius. She believed in him the way Theo always had. Over time, exhibitions spread across Europe. Critics who once mocked him began to call him a master. His paintings, once unsellable, became priceless. But Vincent never painted for money. He painted because he had to. He painted because the colors spoke when words could not. He painted because pain, when transformed into art, becomes eternal. Today, the starry night, sunflowers, and the wheat field with crows hang in museums, admired by millions. But behind every masterpiece lies the story of a man who gave everything, his love, his mind, his life, for beauty. Vincent van Gogh lived only 37 years, yet he changed art forever. He once wrote, "What would life be if we had no courage to attempt anything?" That courage became his legacy. And in every stroke of blue sky, every burst of yellow sun, every trembling star, Vincent still lives, the man who painted his pain and turned it into light.